What's up, SDS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today is certainly no exception. Great Scott, I point my finger. It is time for your true crime Fil with Fil and Scott. A show so good it happens live every Friday, usually much earlier, but Good Friday to you all. Happy Passover, happy Ramadan, whatever other holidays are out there. Best guest today, you know him well. America's most respected detective, Fil Waters. He spent decades in law enforcement, becoming an expert at obtaining criminal confessions. He spent 23 years working as a homicide detective in the Houston PD, investigating more than 400 homicide cases, including one that took the life of his good friend and fellow police officer. Detective Waters is also a Marine and also the owner of Kindred Spirits Investigation, and also the star of the show, the Interrogator. Someone told me to correct that, and I never did. The Interrogator, and he comes to you today from his bunker in Houston. I feel sorry for the poor bastard who tries to break in there. Imagine that. You try to break into Fil's bunker. Agent Scott Duffey is director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute. He is a retired FBI agent out of Delaware. He worked violent crime matters, gangs, bank robberies, fugitive task force cases for 20 years. And prior to that, served 5.5 years as a Pennsylvania police officer. And now we are almost ready to go. But I first have to remind you, please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Twitter, I give you show updates and times at Podcast STS. Facebook, you get what you get on Instagram, which is updates about the show and some cool pictures, including family photos, things of that nature. Please become a YouTube member. Please follow us on Patreon. It's been a wacky few weeks and kind of getting back to normal here. Kathleen Barrett says, lots of love to everyone from the Oregon coast. Love to both Fil and Scott.
Thank you.
Abby, she's been on the show. She wants Fil desperately to adopt her. Talking about there she is. She says, I think his goose already cooked. We're going to get to Bryan Kohberger, the evildoer, in just a minute. But here she is, as is Julie Frew from the UK, as is Teresa, who writes with a lot of emojis. Scott, Fil, Joel, bravo, yippee! It is Friday. Hi, Julie. I'm not sure what's going on, but feel better and get better. I see people are sending you some notes of encouragement. Century Combustion writes, time to get my Fil. As does Marina. Hello from Spain to all of STS Nation. Shaquille Oatmeal. We couldn't do a show without Shaq here. He's saying, what's up? And Marie Hernandez. Kim Smith. We love this. Thank you. A new subscriber from Kentucky. We love your horses and you. And things are off to a good start here. So there's actually some news with the evildoer, Fil Waters. Once again, I have to caution STS Nation because this is primarily coming from one news outlet, and I don't know how many sources on this because they did not mention, but it is coming from News Nation. It's been picked up by all the media outlets, and it is saying primarily that the evildoer, Bryan Kohberger, the University of Idaho quadruple murder suspect, may have held on to an ID belonging to one of the four killed in that November quadruple stabbing. Fil Waters, if this is true and investigators have an ID of one of those four students in their possession that was picked up in his Pennsylvania home or his Pullman, Washington apartment, how does that change the dynamic of the case? And that is not a yes or no answer.
You're learning.
I'm learning. I am. It takes me a while.
From my hand, grasshopper.
Yeah.
half this audience will not even know what that even means. But I think our age group here probably does, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, I would say, and of course, this is always the qualifier, right? If this source is, I'm always reticent to comment about a single source that's not been verified in another way. But since you have asked the question, my singular comment would be that if there is any credibility to it, it would not surprise me that he would take a trophy with him.
That's the answer. Okay. And I guess a lot of sick killers, that's in their MO. They take a
Yeah.
trophy, and in this case, it would be some form of ID. Scott, to you, and by the way, STS Nation, you don't just have to ask about the evildoer. You don't just have to ask about Lori Vallow. I'm also going to ask these gentlemen in a little while about the Cash App founder who was murdered on the streets of San Francisco earlier in the week. And if there are other cases that you want to bring up, feel free to. You got two of the best investigators in all the land. So Friday's a day where we can have a little fun and go out of our typical boundaries. So, Scott, to you, in addition, this report says to DNA evidence, which is that fingernail on the knife sheath, at least that we know of, that ties Kohberger to that grisly scene, an unsealed search warrant is suggesting, along with the source, that police found unspecified IDs or an ID in the glove box of the doctoral student's car. Jennifer Koffendorfer, who is now a contributor to News Nation, said, and I quote, "It is a big deal. That is not a smoking gun, but a smoking license." What would it mean if they did find this form of ID of one of the victims?
Yeah, just like Phil, it's great for the case. It further supports it. It also depends, when were these IDs taken? Were these IDs taken prior to the crime? And it just goes to further support the fact that he has been stalking these victims, that he had gotten close to these victims, one of these victims or all of these victims, and managed to obtain an ID, whether it from their car, their person, perhaps somebody left it on a table, and so it just goes to show that if law enforcement is able to verify if these IDs were in their possession up to and including the day of the crime, the day of the homicides, then he's taking it as a trophy and connects him to even more so being there on the day of and further support committing these crimes. So it all comes down to now is when were these IDs taken, if in fact one or more of these IDs are in his possession.
You see, Scott Duffey did not give a terse answer there, and he expounded and went to the point of when it would have been taken, before, after the crime, really breaking it down. And Fil Waters' text alert went off there, I'm pretty sure. How is your wife? How has she not divorced you with that text alert, Phil? That thing would drive me crazy.
With most everything I do, there's a purpose behind it. I'm not a big fan of texting. I really do not enjoy or care to participate in text messaging conversations. They are very irritating. If you want to talk to me that much, call me on the freaking phone that you're texting on. And so,
by the way, I've only texted with Phil. I never knew this until now, but now I know.
So I have that is a bozo horn. So when it goes off, I know that there is some bozo who is texting me.
Is that a specific bozo? Does that go off for just a specific person?
No, everybody. 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 My wife, you, Scott,
and
my friends, my haters, whoever it may be.
And
I'm an equal opportunity, indiscriminate use of the bozo horn.
now let's just a hypothetical here. You and your wife and maybe two of your children are visiting in town tonight, and you're having dinner, and someone texts you. What does your family say to you when your text alert goes off? I might be losing viewers right now, but it's worth it for me to get this answer.
Well, they don't say anything to me because they know the story behind the bozo horn.
They know it. Gotcha. So people who really know you know not to text you is what you're saying.
Yes, call me on the phone.
Got it. Mitzpah, stay up here. Hey, all from the UK. I'm really tired, so may not make it for long. She just definitely fell asleep and then got awakened by Phil's bozo horn. I will try and stay awake. Laura writes, hello, SDS Nation. Great to see you. T. Hang watching us from Mexico. She is stopping by to say hello. Melissa, we love you for this comment. Best channel out there, best guest as well. We are working to make sure that is the case. Sensory combustion. Great Scott, time to get my true crime fill. Yes, it is. You have to put your finger in the air. Great Scott. Hey, from Richmond, Virginia. Frankie Figs, who was very kind when she got news of my father's passing. I will never forget that. She says, hello, SDS Nation. Adriana, hi from DC. Delana, hello from Naples, Florida, which is a hop, skip, and a jump away from where I am and a place that is near and dear to Fil Waters' heart. Happy Aloha Friday from Maui. So there you go.
Aloha.
Okay. So, some more news that other media outlets, not just News Nation, has picked up on in relation to the evildoer, and that is his potential involvement in other outstanding homicides. If they are they're looking at something very specific that's unsolved with these parameters, they're probably looking in the right direction. Again, that was Jennifer Coffendorfer speaking on the Chris Cuomo show. Apparently, sources are telling News Nation and another outlet or two that authorities in Pennsylvania are quite possibly right now reviewing other cases and a little more than just reviewing, potentially looking at the evildoer for some unsolved crimes. Phil, is that surprising in any way, shape, or form? That's a yes or no. So in addition to that, what would investigators be doing right now?
Well, Jonathan and we discussed this way back when about the due diligence that's going to have to be performed, exercised with this investigation. And that is looking at any other possibility of a related homicide or homicides. Now, I would just caution everyone that because they're doing that does not mean there will be any connections. So while this is part of what they should be doing in this investigation, and it is just as important to eliminate these types of things as it is to find out if there's any connection. So and that's what they're doing. And I think that's so it'll be interesting to see what the results are, but they're going to have some type of tangible affirmative link to those homicides that they're investigating that might bridge the two scenes together.
But Phil, how did they even know where to begin with that? And how far back would they have to go? I believe Bryan is 28 years old. So, I mean, how far back do they have to go? Because he could have been committing a crime at 18 or 19 potentially.
Well, he could have been committing a crime as a juvenile. So I think you go back to, you're going to have to pick an age. I don't know. I might, if I'm looking at this, I might go knowing that we have found things in his past when he was in high school and so forth and so on. So my way of thinking, not knowing everything that they know, I might go back as far as junior high school and start there and see if there's anything, if there are any cases in that area. And then as he starts to move around, the country, going to school and so forth and so on. Then you start going to those areas and finding if you have any cold cases, unsolved mysteries, and that may bear some similarities. But you're gonna start. You've got some parameters here that you can start to eliminate scenes fairly quickly. And then when you have some that have some similarities, then you start diving into those and picking those apart and see if there's any kind of link.
And another hypothetical, Phil. Let's say 3 years ago, a woman in the same county as Bryan Kohberger in Pennsylvania. Let's say she was murdered, but she was shot 3 times, and it's not been solved. Are they immediately glossing over that since she was shot and not stabbed, or are they saying, could this still be the evildoer, but he had a different MO at that time? And how would you know how to do that?
I don't ever deal in hypotheticals, Joel. So Scott might be more appropriate to answer that question.
That's very smart. We're going to get to Scott in 1 minute. Lorna says, hello, everyone. Jody writes, hello from Virginia. There used to be a slogan, Virginia is for lovers. Love Scott and Phil. Got Tali in Israel. Hope you're staying safe there. Israel getting bombarded at the moment by rocket from Gaza. So never a good thing. So wishing you a peaceful Passover in the Holy Land. Mac, look where he is. Hello from Houston, Texas.
All right.
Love these guys. You could almost go break into Phil's bunker right now if you wanted to.
That would be a mistake. That'd be ill-advised.
That would be ill-advised. Suzanne, hello from Canada. Hello from Austria. Hello from the UK. Salutations from Scott's neck of the woods, Baltimore, Maryland. Hello from London. We truly have a global audience. Allie Snow, hello from Houston, Texas. And then MC Spunky here. Hello, happy Friday. It is Good Friday. Best guests, Scott, Phil, and Joel from Utah. And then don't forget New Zealand. Don't forget New Zealand. We've got New Zealand here too. And don't forget South Africa. We've got Michelle from South Africa here. And don't forget Winnipeg, Canada. We should just do an entire show one day of where people are from. It'd be kind of cool. And don't forget Israel.
You know what, Joe? The international audience is growing.
It is. I've actually noticed that.
This is pretty phenomenal there.
It is. And we had, believe it or not, yesterday, and if you didn't see it, please go back and watch, a guy named Rick Allen Ross, along with Joshua Ritter and Ann Bremner, who are both phenomenal attorneys. But Rick Allen Ross, I'm going to ask you about this a little later, is one of the world experts on cults in relation to the Lori Vallow Daybell case. And super fascinating conversation. So if you guys missed that, please check that out. Scott, Jeanette writes, the evildoer looks too creepy to have not killed before. I want to get your take on that comment. First, let's get your take on that comment. Can you ever judge a book by its cover, Scott?
No. The simple answer would be no. It's tempting, but no.
Let me ask you a question, Phil and Scott. Bryan Kohberger, you're working the case. He gets brought in. He's presumed innocent until guilty. But the same way surgeons are talking during operations, are you guys in the back room going, this guy looks like a crazy, creepy bastard? You can tell me.
Oh, tell you? Okay.
Yeah, is that a conversation that you...
Let me send you a text message, Joel, with that answer.
Okay. So, Scott, to you, in virtually every high-profile case, this is from famed defense attorney Mark Garagos. He said this on News Nation. In virtually every high-profile case that is a circumstantial evidence murder case, you almost inevitably hear of some other unsolved murder, and law enforcement looks to see if they can link whoever the suspect is. For one thing, I suppose it fills a vacuum. Why did someone do this when you don't have a motive? That is the most obvious explanation. Does Garagos, he's basically saying that you're always going to look at these guys, once there are other cold cases, once you have a suspected killer of this magnitude in custody. Is this true?
Oh, absolutely.
That's what I just said. Yeah,
Yeah.
what I just said. So
Well, Scott has a different take. So
isn't Garrigo sitting? Wasn't he Scott Peterson's attorney?
correct.
Yeah,
Infamous Scott Peterson.
yeah. And that guy, that jackass, is trying to get. He's trying to get out.
He's trying to get out.
Get
Killed
all
a
this
pregnant woman, convicted. By the way, Scott, we're going to
right.
let you answer in a second. Classic Hopper. It's about the effing music, is this guy's name. So Scott, what's your take on this? I mean, and do you agree with Phil, or do you need to go back to junior high here?
Oh yeah, go back as early as you can. I mean, so first and foremost, you're looking for cold cases and pulling out those cold cases, regardless. Look, so when this guy was born, when he starts to maybe come of age, junior high, etc., and then start looking at cases. But there is a program, and I just wanted to mention it, called VICAP, and it's all what you put into it, right? But VICAP is a great program that ultimately allows law enforcement, with a whole bunch of other resources and databases, to put very unique cases, violent cases, murders, rapes, sexual assaults, and other violent crimes into this program run by the FBI. And departments then put all that they have into this program, which then allows, so for example, you have a case in the West Coast, Middle West, Midwest, Southeast, Northeast, and not everybody's reading the news. Not everybody is just looking for these high profile cases, and then all of a sudden start looking through their cold cases. So they are able to search this database for similarities to their crime, and then put their crime into this database so it can be searched by others in law enforcement. So it's a pretty good program, and it keeps getting better and better, but it is only as good as as what is put into it.
I'm fascinated by this. So what kind of information would you put in that would be similar? Like, I mean, for instance, you put in a white Hyundai Elantra, if maybe he was driving the same sort of car at that time, or I mean, what sort of pertinent information would you be looking to put into this program that might be able to link it up to something else?
Yeah, so every participating, and any agency can participate, and ultimately looking for a coordinator, right? So for example, Delaware would have a Delaware coordinator, small enough. You can have more than one coordinator, but you would have a coordinator that would then see a case that's of interest, speak to the investigator, and investigators are very busy with their own work, but you can then have, ultimately it's just inputting information, and you're going into this database and you are filling in the blanks. So it's very specific. It's victimology, it is suspect profiles, it is anything that can assist. So the more you put into it, the better it is for somebody else in another territory to look through without having to necessarily reach out to that specific department. But there is contact information that allows the investigator, that if they can't get what they're looking for just by reading all the reports that have been inputted, then there's a contact, for the one investigator to reach out to another investigator. So VICAP is very specific in it, and it requires a lot of information. So you just don't have these generalities out there where basically anything looks like it can be connected. So it's very, very, very specific, and it's constantly updated, through that unit, to continue to make it um, accessible for any department in the country.
Best guess with the best information. I'm sure soon enough, just like with ChatGPT, a guy like Scott Duffey is going to be able to talk into his phone or desk at work and list everything and say, "Hey, BICAP or whatever, I've got this case, it's unsolved, blah 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 blah," and this AI is going to start to piece together stuff. That's going to be next, which is going to be wild. Phil's adopted daughter, Abby, whose last name I can't pronounce, Teja, I believe it is. I love freaking Phil Friday with Scott, the tough stuff Duffey, and MC Jazzy Joel dropping the knowledge. Special thanks to Mrs. Joel. We call her Bugs, the one and only CEO of everything, Chief Marketing Officer, Chief Technical Officer. She does it all. And speaking of our global audience, Staffordshire, UK, Temple, Texas. Where's that, Phil? Is that near you?
It's I want to say it's about 150 miles. It's probably northwest of us. They're around Austin, between Austin and Dallas, I think.
It's a big state, so you got to
forgive. It's a nice motorcycle day ride.
Motorcycle. You have a Harley too, Phil?
I used to have. Well, I do have a Harley. But I've been riding Victories. So I've been riding Victories since 2006, and in fact, I just picked up a 2000 model FXSTD, which is the Deuce Harley Davidson, and it is going to be reconditioned, and it is destined for Hawaii.
Listen, I was gonna one of two things: convince my soon-to-be 4-year-old son to become a professional tennis player. I already have him on the court, and I am making him hit 1,000 forehands and backhands before he goes to bed at night with no food allowed. His other possibility was becoming a 155-pound UFC champion. There could be a little brain damage involved with that. Not a great idea. I might convince him to become a Houston homicide detective because Fil Waters lives a great life. The guy drives a Ferrari. He wears Hawaiian shirts, spends half the year in Hawaii. Guy's got a good life, man. Maybe he should become a Houston homicide detective.
I've been very blessed. Wasn't my doing.
Awesome. Just Ginger, or Ginger, but no R. Hey, from England, happy Easter, Passover to all. Best comment of the day so far from my friend in the south of Spain. What was that sound? That is Phil's bozo horn. I wonder if we're losing more subscribers than gaining right now by doing this. But it's Friday, and this is what we do on Friday. If you don't like it,
we missed a week, so we've got to catch up here.
Exactly. And look, Karen writes, hi from Australia. We are seeing an uptick in our international audience. We're going to have to take an international STS crime tour in our special jet, which Phil will provide from his confines in Houston, Texas. Another thing about the evildoer, and then we'll move on. Experts. This was out of Newsweek, believe it or not. Some experts were interviewed and said that they think or agree that Bryan Kohberger's car is going to emerge as the most damning piece of evidence against him. And this expert, who is a forensic expert, says, what I think the key piece of evidence is that white Hyundai Elantra. And to the extent that any of the victims have any blood, hair, DNA in that vehicle, that's going to be very helpful for the prosecution. And then Joseph Scott Morgan, a friend of the show who hosts a podcast called Body Bags, he writes, just his car alone is a rolling crime scene. This thing has been pretty much completely dismantled, and they're going to be using this thing bit by bit. Phil, do you agree with the fact that that is potentially the biggest treasure trove of information for investigators, that car?
You asking me?
You're going to say yes. Or you're going to say no?
Well,
I am asking you.
Okay. Well, yes. But look, if the car wraps to the scene, to his apartment, I mean, it will be part of the big picture. Whether I would call it a treasure trove, I don't know. It kind of remains to be seen what comes out of it. But I think if they get one scintilla of an identifiable profile from one of those young people in that car, I mean, game over. I think there's a lot of, but then if that happens at the apartment, if they find the dog's hair, so there are a lot of areas here where pieces of evidence could rise to the top that is just going to further wrap the scene together in one place with him in the middle of it. So I think the car is a key piece of it. I don't know whether it is at this point, whether I would say, yeah, that's it. That's it. I think this is one of these big picture cases. And I think every piece of evidence is going to be significant, just like if this is true about him having one of their IDs. So all of these pieces, because remember, these investigations, I think I've talked about this before, are like jigsaw puzzles. So when you get the jigsaw puzzle, what's the first thing you do? You throw all those pieces out on the table, and then you turn them all over, and then you build the frame, and then you start putting in the pieces where you think they go, and then you start building this big picture. And as you put more pieces in, the more clear the picture becomes. And then there are some times where the dog eats a couple of the pieces, and so you don't have the whole picture, but you've got enough of it to be able to tell the story about what happened. So I think this is just another piece in that puzzle, but a significant one.
And Phil's adoptive daughter here, Abby, says, is it time to lift the gag order so we don't have to keep hearing all these speculative theories, Scott? Followed by this comment from Michelle in South Africa. Considering the gag order, which is in place, how does all this information get leaked? I would consider it to be potentially detrimental to the court case. What about the fact that information is spilling out, Scott, but there is supposedly a gag order in place? And I apologize again. Got a cough that won't go away, and I've got the throat lozenge in. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm chewing tobacco right now. I'm not. Scott?
That's all right. That doesn't bother me a bit.
Not that Texan.
Yeah, I mean, what does a gag order do? It prevents the interested parties from speaking to the facts of the case, right? Until probably it's, at least from what I have gathered in Idaho, until it's made it through a court hearing, and then it becomes public knowledge. So it's all speculation. There are theories out there based upon what we think has come out as a leak. Maybe it is a leak, maybe it's not. Maybe it's somebody else just surmising, but ultimately, it all depends where the leaks are coming from. So are the leaks just somebody who overhears something between a couple of detectives, or you have a couple of different police departments involved, you have a couple of different labs involved, and so your inner circle keeps growing and growing. And so if somebody gets a piece of information, perhaps talks to somebody at home or over coffee or at a bar, and then just provides a little bit of information, and then somebody tells somebody else, right? And then it becomes a story. So yeah, it's all speculation. And that's all Phil and I can talk to, is to what, if the information was true, what are the plausible theories, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, the gag order is in place, and there is a reason for it. But when information comes out, it's I don't think, at least from the information I've been hearing, it doesn't appear to be detrimental to the point that it changes somebody's thought of something. So ultimately, it's the information will come out. It will come out in due time, and we could all be wrong, or we could all be partially right, or maybe 100. It all makes for good talk shows.
The voice of reason has spoken. Phil, this is coming from Courtney, not from me. The evildoer seems like a rage-filled Ted Bundy, only without the charm. Seems sexually repressed, fantasizes about killing women who in his mind has felt turned down by women. What say you? I know you're not a criminal profiler. And let me add this question onto this. When you are questioning someone who is suspected of a heinous crime, how do you not profile them a bit? How do you keep it fair and honest?
Fair is what you pay a taxi.
Okay.
So and look, I'm not ashamed to tell you, if you want to use the P word, if we want to use profile, look, what I'm doing when I go into an interview room is I'm preparing myself to interview this particular person. So I have to determine how I'm going to approach them. I need to understand not to say things that may be triggers for them that would somehow breach the discussion altogether. And so, I've talked about it before. I do a psychological autopsy. I want to know them as best as I can before I walk in that room. I've already done research on them in terms of if we get a person that we have not yet arrested, but we know this is our good suspect. I'm already compiling that biographical information on them so that I've got something, and I'll find something that I can connect to them with, because one of the parts of the formula of a successful interview is to share a little bit of yourself. It doesn't mean that you're going to intend to, swap spit by the time you get out of there, but you want to share a little bit of yourself and show some empathy toward the person you're talking to, that you have an understanding of the fix they're in. And I can tell you that certainly after my years in homicide and having worked the number of cases that I worked, I was able to be empathetic to their plight because I have seen hundreds of people just like them in that situation. So I do understand their level of anxiety. I do understand what they're going through, and I do understand what's going through their head. There's been a couple of times in an interview room where I have asked a question and I see the look on their face, and they'll look at and they want to answer, but they'll hesitate. And I'll say, I know exactly what's going through your head. And they'll look at me and go, really? And I said, yeah, you're asking yourself, why is he asking me that question? And I've been right 100% of the time.
And what did they say when you say that?
Well, I don't, when I say that to them, what's their response?
Yes.
They just kind of look at me, and, some of them look at me. I've said it before, kind of like a calf looking at a new gate. It's just kind of like, so this guy's a mind reader too, that kind of thing. But, and then I say that because it gives them a way out. So now that I've called them, now that I've said what I've said, and they go, well, yeah, and I said, so then I'll explain to them why I asked them that question, because that's all they ever want is an explanation. And most of these folks that come down, especially the ones that I brought down non-custodially, they weren't under arrest. They were not in custody. They were free to leave anytime they wanted to. And people will ask me, why in the world would they come down and talk to you? And so I'd like to say, well, it's, my good looks and charm and all that stuff, but that's not the case. It's just that when you approach people to talk to them about something like homicide, they, especially if you've got the right person, they want to know what you know. And the only way they can find that out is to come down voluntarily and sit in that room and talk with you. What has amazed me more than anything else is the length of time that folks will sit in that room and speak with me. And then in most cases, make some admissions and then make a confession and then demonstrate for me what they had done. And the whole time they could have walked out of the room anytime they wanted to. And
do you think it's because most Americans just don't know their rights? What do you attribute that to?
No. Oh, no. Heck no. No.
No, they just want to talk.
They've all seen television shows. I mean, good grief. And look, in a non-custodial interview, they don't have to be Mirandized. There is no requirement in law to Mirandize them.
Okay.
That's why at the beginning of those interviews, the first thing I say to them is, you're not under arrest. You're not in custody. You're free to leave. And I really appreciate you coming down here voluntarily to speak with me.
So are you required to say that part at the beginning?
I won't tell you that it is if you take my class, I will tell you, you need to do it. You absolutely have got to do that, because what that does, there's not a requirement in law, but there is in my instruction in interviewing, it is a must do. And what that does is that sets the tone for the rest of that interview, and it allows the prosecutors to be able to answer the question that the defense is going to be asking is, was my client coerced? Was my client threatened? Was my client this and that? And did my client get his rights read? Well, if it's non-custodial, it's not a requirement of law. So they're down voluntarily.
So do you think it's human nature that people, they especially if they've committed the crime, it's almost like they need to get it off their chest and talk about it. And they meet a guy like Fil Waters, very charismatic, very engaging, seems kind, genuine. He wants to be there. He wants to hear your story. Do you attribute it more to human nature that they sit there and they don't get up and leave, that they want to reveal information or share it with somebody?
Oh, I think in many cases, yes. And of course, I mean, 9 times out of 10, they start with denials. I mean, I didn't do it, or I don't know, they've got some, or they'll make an admission about something that on the surface seems very mundane, seems very benign. I had a capital murder suspect who, I think I've talked about him before, who had murdered a little, 4'10" little Latina gal coming home from her birthday party at 4:00 in the morning. And he walked up to her and he stuck a Glock 40 cal in her throat and blew her head off and stole her purse. And she had apparently her PIN number was written on her debit card. And he went around. The first thing he did was 45 minutes later, he was down withdrawing $300 from every ATM machine he could find. So, and then he went to Walmart on a shopping spree and was passing the card around. Well, the first thing he did, and it was a non-custodial interview, by the way, but the first thing he did when we started talking was immediate. He made an admission that he had the card. So he's already, I had the card. Well, where did you get the card? Oh, I found it. So there you go. So, he tells a little bit of the truth, but then he tells the lie, which makes the whole thing a lie. And then we go from there. And so it ends up 6 hours later, he finally does confess and then ends up demonstrating for me what he did. And then he apologizes to me for wasting my time, for sitting in that room for 6 hours.
I am just stunned at the stupidity that you're going to commit that crime and then take out money. But you guys have seen it all, so I'm sure it didn't surprise you. But I guess he was kind enough to apologize for wasting your time. Scott, to you, I mean, it always amazes me, back to this for a minute, Phil, that people do not think about repercussions. It's amazing. Like, people just act in the moment. Why is that? Why, before I get back to Scott, why don't people think, if I pull this trigger and I kill this woman senselessly, and then I go and use her ATM card, I will momentarily be able to buy myself my new skateboard, but I will then be spending the next 75 years in the worst, of prisons in the Texas Department of Corrections. Why do people not think about the result of their actions until it is too late?
Well, because they're people. And they are, I've said it here before. I mean, you're either out doing the right thing or you're doing the wrong thing. It's black and white. It's either good or it's evil, one or the other. And you're going to have consequences for either direction you choose to go. And I think in terms of the culture, I think over at least since the 60s, you can see the moral foundation of the country being destroyed incrementally. And for a lot of reasons, one primarily that I've talked about before here. And I just, it is because people don't think. I guess maybe that's the short answer here. They just don't think because they're in the moment. Because this guy, he tells me that he went out. The purpose for him going out that night was to rob someone because he didn't have any money. So he's going to go find somebody who does, and he's going to take it from them. And he's
And
going to.
did he tell you why he decided to kill her, not just scare her and take the card?
Well, his explanation was that it was an accident. And of course, my definition I was asked about intent on the stand, and I said the minute a person takes a loaded weapon with them for the purpose of committing an aggravated robbery and something goes wrong and either the person resists, there's some sort of a noise that's made, a scream that draws attention to them, whatever that is that causes them to shoot him and kill them. The intent, the act was fulfilled, but the intent was to do what they did when they took that loaded weapon with them. I don't think you can separate the two. I don't think you can say, well, I took the gun with me just to make sure I got the money, but you know what? I really didn't intend to kill anybody with it. Well, then why the hell do you have it? If that's the case, just go up there and tell them you're going to beat the crap out of them and take their money. Why use the weapon? Because they want the quick fix. Point the gun, give me your money. Most people are going to go, oh yeah, crap, here it is, and they leave, and that's it. So it's the I guess it's people, these criminals, that element, those people that make these terrible decisions on the side of wrong. They've been brought up in a world where it's instead of living your life to have a fine dining experience, they're in the fast food lane at McDonald's.
Well put. That's a mic drop moment right there. To the voice of reason, Scott Duffey. I find this very interesting. Same experience as Phil in terms of these non-custodial interviews that you've had. Do you find that most people will sit and talk to you despite not having to be there?
Yeah, but early in my career, I changed it up a little bit. So for any interview that I did, and usually as a partner, I had somebody from a Delaware police department, Delaware State Police, Wilmington, Newcastle. So my partner was a police officer, detective, working a case side by side. So for us, just in case it went federally, because it could change U.S. Attorney's Office to U.S. Attorney's Office. But if we had a suspect identified, not yet arrestable, someone where a warrant has been put out, they haven't been put into any database, NCIC, as a suspect of our crime, and we were talking with them. I went and I did that extra step. Exactly, I agree with Phil. We had absolutely no requirement under the law to Mirandize them, but we did. And we've had people that came in thinking they were a witness to a crime, because you want to get them in the door first and foremost. And so it is, whether it be knocking at their door, a telephone message, or leaving a card, and then they just follow up. That's clue number one, that things are pretty good. And then once they arrived, we were always doing audio visual recordings of those interviews. And I would just make it a part of my, hey, this is a formality, and going to read you your rights. And it is amazing that I would say many don't even blink, and they're like, okay, this is how it's done in a FBI office or a police station, and okay. And then they would proceed, and we did that because for our sake, if all of a sudden there was a there was a break in the interview where all of a sudden they were moving towards confessing. We didn't want to break that. And then all of a sudden, okay, now that you're saying something that's incriminating, let me now advise you of your right. So we just did that early in our interviews just to make it consistent. And then for the most part, they did work in our favor, but there was no requirement to do that. That was just something me and my partners had decided to do, and it did work out for us.
Melter Skelter writes, everyone is a bozo, incredulous that Fil thinks everyone who texts is a bozo, followed by Marina here. Fil cracks me up. This is one of my favorite ones here from Rain Dancer, the bozo texter doer. Melter writes, remind me not to piss off Fil. Probably never a good idea. Justin writes, we love this. Hey, everyone, my first live show. Thanks for putting on a great show. Thanks for tuning in, Justin. Marvina writes, hello, everyone. And the list goes on. Dallas, nature lover, Fil. Nope, I will not be friends with someone who ignores texts. I was injured and in an emergency room and sent a group text to family to let them know she cannot be friends with you. If she was injured, well, he might respond because he'd get the bozo horn. He might be the first to respond, actually. You never know.
Well, I never said, see, this is what I think is funny about people, because, they're not even listening to what I said. So they hear what they want to hear so they can offer some sort of, opinion. And, I didn't say I didn't answer the texts. I just said I like to know that I've got a bozo texting me.
I had a boss in the TV news business who used to say, people, the problem that won't go away.
True.
Daff says, hi from Manitoba, Canada. Mac 19, ha, ha, ha. I love it, Fil. I had the crickets alert for a boyfriend who never spoke when things got serious. Mac is just my pet's name, by the way, in case you thought Mac was the real name. And Lita here, visiting my mom in South Florida. You're in our neck of the woods, enjoying Joel and his best guests. What's not to enjoy about the best guests? And then J. Thomas Reset.
There he is. There's Hunter. He's back.
Do you really believe that BK had a victim's ID? Do you really believe that? I love that Jay's a cynic. Look, and you got to have cynics in the world. And
well, I love Jay, but again, those words didn't come out of anybody's mouth on this panel. So I don't know who he's listening to, but none of that was ever said.
There you go, J. Thomas Reset. Jimmy C., a friend of the show, as well as his beautiful wife, Jeannie. Multitasking, don't tell the police this, driving and watching. Can't miss the Joel and Gang show. Scott and Fil didn't just hear that you said that you're driving and watching. Be careful on the roads.
Well, let me say something here, Joel. Unless they've got a dead body in the trunk, I could care less about them driving and watching.
There you go. J. Thomas Reset says, whoever did the 1122 King Road crime, it wasn't their first time out of the box. So he's coming back. Let me look at this. Let's look at Frankie Fig's comment here. If law enforcement obtained, say, phone records via a warrant during the investigation in Idaho, can they use those records to look at other crimes, Fil?
Sure.
Sure, Frankie. The answer to that is sure. We're moving on here. Lori Vallow Daybell. We've got some news on this. They have now seated a jury, and it is made up of 10 men and 8 women, 6 of who will be alternates. 10 men, 8 women, and the jurors are going to be sworn in on Monday. Scott, I ask this question often. Is there such a thing as a slam dunk case? Most people like yourselves always say no, but is this as close as you can get in some ways? What do you think?
Yeah, so I saw Phil shaking his head, and I would say absolutely not, right? There is
Yeah.
no slam dunk case. And I've, and I think Phil can relate when the investigator feels like we have everything imaginable. You can always get more, but you feel really good. And then you start looking at the jury like, wait a minute, what did I miss? Or because, you have different defense attorneys that come up with different ideas.
Yeah.
It's somewhat of a show, and we do our jobs because we do it with the purpose of finding the truth, and then we present everything in a courtroom. But we're not the presenters; it is the attorneys, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys. Things can go sideways really quick. Um,
Scott used an interesting word there, and that word was presenter. And I will tell you, I would tell prosecutors that I worked with when we had a case that was not a slam dunk, and it needed to have a, a district attorney, an assistant district attorney that was going to take what they had and have passion about presenting it to that jury. Because Scott's right. You never know what a jury's going to do. You really do not know what a jury's going to do. I've had some juries just, you've got to be freaking kidding me, But I would tell those prosecutors that, and they were friends of mine, but there were, when they got that little touch of being timid, it would alarm me because I knew we had a good case. We had a good, solid case, and it was going to be, as Scott's alluded to, how that case is presented to the jury. And what I would tell them is this: you've got to make a decision that you're either going to be a presenter or you're going to be a prosecutor. And if you cannot make the decision, then you're going to walk in there and you're going to be trying to put your legs on both sides of that fence, and you're going to try to be middle of the road. And what happens with those people that are like that won't make a commitment one way or the other, they're trying to please everybody, and they just end up pissing everybody off. So that was my best advice to them. And all of them turned out to be prosecutors. I had some really, really talented, knowledgeable prosecutors when I worked in homicide.
Just Me says, waving from Spokane, Washington. Look at this. Hello from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. If that was not enough, Nooney. Hello from Armenia.
Wow.
Hard to believe. I'm a weird bird, and I'll tell you why in a second. We've got New Orleans. We've got Atlantic, Canada. Mitzvah says, welcome to the world. She's still awake, apparently, so that's good. Hello from Colorado. Hello from Seattle. Hello from Portland. Hello from Germany. Hello from the Northeast. The list goes on. So I'm a weird guy because I love this radio show, Coast to Coast. They talk about aliens and conspiracy theories. Art Bell. And so I listen
Awesome.
the best. And I listen to old Art Bell shows. And I was listening to an old Art Bell show recently.
Art's among the aliens now, right?
He is among the aliens. For those of you who don't know Art, you got to Google Art Bell. But he married a woman. His first wife passed away, and married a woman in the Philippines. And I was listening to a show from 2002, and he was going on and on about how his technology, that the company was able, because he worked for a big media company, they were able to make it work, that he could do a show from the Philippines that could be broadcast live to the United States. And that was only 20 years ago. And here we are in 2023, and we've got Armenia and Connecticut and Myrtle Beach and Humble, Texas, all on the same show. So
Humble. There is
no Humble.
H.
Oh, no H.
Humble.
Humble, Texas. And I had Phil correct me. Where is Humble, Texas?
It's right here in Harris County. It's right outside of Houston.
Whoever's in Humble, do not break into Phil's bunker, whatever you do.
They're on the other side of the world from me. So,
Scott, there's my cough. So this trial is starting, and I've asked this question before. There are basically 3 states involved in this: Arizona, Idaho, and Hawaii, where these 2 evildoers were bouncing around. How do you coordinate those investigations, and what are these investigators doing right now to prepare for this trial? And answer that in under 9 seconds, please. No, you can take your time.
So anybody that's outside of Idaho, good for them, right? It's any time that I could assist another agency from another state or another country, I'm all in. And make sure you put my name down as a witness, because I want to travel. So the traveling is coordinated through the prosecutor's office, and that's sometimes the tough, where the money comes in, and bringing in witnesses, babysitting witnesses, whatever have you. But law enforcement, wherever it is, it goes to show you just how small the world can be, especially in the law enforcement community, because everybody's there to help for the most part. I've seen in my career. So they are preparing very well with the prosecutors. My guess is through lots of Zoom meetings and telephone calls, and then ultimately are being brought in, if there are any aren't there, to have many sit-down meetings with the prosecutors, all the investigators, and just going through everything, all the witnesses, et cetera, and making sure they're doing great trial prep, to making sure they've covered everything, covered all angles, and any question that they think could come up has already been answered.
Mountain Girl writes, Rick Allen Ross. I was a cult expert we had on last night, and I don't say it because it's my show, but you should check it out because it's my show, but it's also super interesting. He was riveting yesterday, Mountain Girl writes. Had a client who had been in the Heaven's Gate cult with, I think his name was Marshall Applewhite, left before they all met their fate. He was the trippy-looking, white-haired, sort of balding guy that had everyone kill themselves so they could go in their tennis shoes so they could go to heaven. Back to Phil mentioning Scott Peterson. Sharp Tack writes, Scott Peterson needs to fry. And Melter Skelter, thank you, SCS, for bringing us these knowledgeable guests, the best of the best. This is an interesting question from Catherine here. And Phil, I was going to ask you a different question, but we'll ask you this one first. Fil and Scott, do you have formal training in body language, or do your skills just come from years of experience? Fil Waters.
I went to several classes on body language and interviewing. You know, the Reed School is the kind of the grandfather of, excuse me, of all those schools, and have been through the Rhodes School, which is a, excuse me, another school that was available, and that was 3 or 4 days, and that was kind of a different spin on things, because he was not only a former chief of police, but he also had a doctorate in psychology. So a lot of his interviewing techniques were framed around psychology and the way you framed questions. And of course, by the time I got through with that, I realized, I mean, he had some great stuff, but I realized that I would have to have a doctorate in psychology to be able to apply anything that he just taught us for the last 3 or 4 days. So, but I've been to, and then there's been a couple others that I've been to as well. And then I have, with my old partner, we wrote up a curriculum for interviewing and had a basic interview course and an advanced interview course. And we took the best of everything that we had been taught. We put it together in our curriculum. And then what was different about ours was that we had a different presentation about the way we conduct interviews. So it was, so yes, I mean, to answer that question, yes. And plus, and you only get better, and Scott, I think, will agree with me. You only get better at interviewing when you interview. So the more of those, and I'm talking about everything that you do in this, where you're talking to a witness, where you're talking to a complainant, whether you're talking to a suspect, where you're just walking into a store and you are asking them, can we get the video that you guys may have? So if you approach it that way, and the way that you speak to people and the way you communicate with people, you will get better at it. And I tell everybody in the classes that I teach, and I've taught interviewing all over the world, and people are people, and they are, and cops are cops. I don't care where you go. Cops are cops and crooks are crooks. So they're always willing to absorb new information that's going to help them do their jobs better. And the interview process, or getting comfortable, when you're a patrol officer, we would encourage people that took our class in patrol that apply these things to everybody you come in contact with. You make a little dope bust out there, interview that person that you're arresting. Get used to getting in that kind of a mindset about interviewing people. Get comfortable Mirandizing people if you need to, and we show them the proper way to Mirandize someone, and making sure you get an explicit waiver to those rights to continue the conversation. So it's a combination of things, and I always wanted to get better at it. I still do. I try to learn something new every day. I watch a lot of these shows where interviews are conducted because I want to see if there's something that they're doing that I've never seen before. And I'm a great poacher, and I'll take it and I'll use it. So it does take, and it's an art. It's an art, the art of the interview, and it takes experience, and it takes doing it, and doing it right over and over again to get better at it. But I told people in those classes that, look, the purpose of this class is not to turn you into a little Phil, because there's enough of Phil to go around. Trust me. So what I emphasized is that you may never be a great interviewer, but you will always be a better interviewer. So put into practice. Then the payoff was, and Scott, you may have experienced this. I know you teach a course up there where you're at, right?
Yes.
So the payoff was that one of these patrol officers, or however many that went through that class, would call me when they got their first confession. And it was like, man, this stuff works. And I'm like, there you go. So that affirmation that they get when they do it, when they use the things they've been taught, it just makes them better as they proceed through their career and conduct interview after interview after interview.
People are people, cops are cops, and crooks are crooks. The great Fil Waters. Scott Duffey, the FBI has deep pockets. Did they send you for body language type behavior? And Lorna says, Phil's got it made real quick. Marina, what's not to love? We love Scott and Phil. We've got Northern Ireland in the house. And a quick jab at Phil. Can't hunt ducks in a Ferrari while wearing a flowery shirt. It just don't work. It's almost
that's okay, because I don't hunt ducks, so that's taken care of.
There you go, Jay Thomas. You said, Scott, did you take body language courses at the FBI? Did they send you down to Quantico or wherever they send you?
Yeah. So when I started in '97, it was a 16-week course. It's then gone into 22 weeks, I believe it is now. So yeah, I think today's agent is getting somewhat of 140 plus hours of rigorous training. And that's for victims, witnesses, and suspects. And so there's a lot of role playing. The FBI then developed their own interview interrogations course. I was one of the ones that went in on the pilot, and early, in the last 15 years, and then have taken that with the, just like Phil, going into the popular Reed School, not only a basic but advanced. I think the best course I've gone to was actually in Tel Aviv, and so it was a 2-week interview interrogation course, and to witness, to see things, to to go through different departments, different countries, really does just fine tune. But it is a skill. It is an art. If you're not doing it, it's going to erode. And so, same way in my classes, teaching the basics. I try to get the 0 to 5 years experience, the patrolman, the early young detective, and then just say this is just another a tool to put in your toolbox, and hopefully it works. And just like Phil, I love when somebody reaches out and says, yes, I applied this, I applied that. And you just keep doing it, and you keep watching others. I've had young agents, rookie agents, that I would sit by and then watch them and see, there's some natural talent, but there's a lot of good information that you can learn and say, hey, that's not something I've applied, and I'm going to try it. But I would say the key is rapport. You establish a relationship with whoever you have in that room, and if you're able to, quickly that the chemistry has been established, it's there, and the person on the other side of that table is listening, and you can tell by their body language, I'm either there or I'm not. And to keep them tuned, to keep them engaged, and ultimately get what you need, and that is the truth, that piece of information that you probably already knew you had. It's going to support the evidence, back up the evidence, and then of course it's in their own words, their own writing, and bingo.
The only thing I have to comment about what Scott just said was, there's never a table between me and the person I'm interviewing, ever.
What do you do with the table?
It's over to the side. It's just where I can put stuff. I don't take notes during an interview. I don't utilize the table. I set them separate and apart from the table. I don't want them using it as a crutch. And I don't want any degree of separation at all.
I smell, and I might be wrong, but I smell coming up at some point in the near future a special show entitled The Art of the Interview with Fil and Scott. These guys get paid a lot, so maybe we'll figure out a way to do this. So I'm going to talk to these guys. It's super interesting, and I could sit and listen to that for hours. People use a table as a crutch. Physically, they will hold on to it. It's what do they do with it, Phil? They'll use it.
Elbows on it. Look, when I could show you some interviews that the person the room set up, everything in the interview room is critical. So setting up the interview room is critical. So the table gets pushed into the corner. It's going to be there. It's going to put the stuff on it. I'm going to be in a chair with wheels. They're going to be in a chair with no wheels. They're going to be about, 7, 8, 10 inches away from that table. They are not going to be able to get access to it. I have had some when I've walked in the room where they have turned the chair to the end of the table, and they're sitting there waiting for me. And I just walk in, and very nicely, I say to them, I need you to move back around like this. And they do. And that does a couple of things. Number one, it puts them where I want them in that room. And the second thing is it shows them in a very subtle way that I'm in control of this interview.
And what if they have a cup of coffee that they're drinking? Where do they put it down? On the floor?
Oh, no, they can put it on the table.
Oh, on the table next to them. I got it.
And they've got that cup of coffee or that bottle of water because I've offered it to them.
Fascinating. I definitely smell a show on this. And speaking of that, M Friday writes, I feel the complete opposite to Phil about texting versus calling. Please don't call me unless it's an emergency. Different people, different expectations. Sharnay Venter writes, good evening from Cape Town, South Africa. Yeah. Interesting. Phil, I wanted to get your take on this, and then we'll do a few minutes on this guy in Silicon Valley, which is an interesting story. Brian Enton, who you know, Phil, from News Nation.
Yes.
He interviewed a woman who was close to Lori Vallow's circle, the so-called doomsday mom.
Right.
And she explained she was part of this cult. Explained that Lori saw her children as cockroaches controlled by a parasite, and that killing the kids to them is mercy. Um, I was curious when I read this, what the hell would Phil do with Lori Vallow if he knew this in an interview room? If you knew that, have you had cult members that you've interviewed before? And if you knew that this thought process that she viewed her kids as cockroaches and parasites and knew that she had, how would you approach that kind of an interview?
Well, I used to, when I worked narcotics, we had a lot of crooks that were into the cults of satanic cults. We had
By the
people.
way, not to interrupt, but look at Jessica. Has Phil or Scott had a case as convoluted as the Chad Lori case? If so, how did they handle the interrogation of such delusional individuals? That is exactly my question. I didn't even see it. So
No,
I didn't
so
mean to interrupt.
yeah, one of the only reason I'm saying what I'm saying is that I used to teach about cults, and at the time we had kind of a deal going here around Houston where we had some satanic type cults and gatherings and that kind of thing. And of course, with the in the drug world, you've got practitioners of Santeria, Brujeria, Palomayambe. You've got a lot of different cult type activities going on. So I kind of became immersed in that and did give instruction about cults and about for patrol officers to things to recognize if they saw certain things in vehicles and that kind of things, tattoos, that kind of stuff. But in regards to, so I did talk to, I have talked to some cult members to try to get an idea of just the mindset, what causes them to join that. And they all have it's kind of a common denominator that those people that get involved in these things are like all of us. They're searching for an answer, and they come across somebody, and in this particular case, like a Chad Daybell, who seems to, and they both come from kind of common religious backgrounds, so they've got that connection. And then this Daybell character, he presenting himself as a prophet and that kind of thing. And he starts writing books that are kind of apocalyptic, and she's reading the books. I think he even had a science fiction book out. He's kind of like an L. Ron Hubbard kind of nut job. And so to interview someone like her, you've got to have an understanding about her mindset, about how she's thinking and how she looks at things. And if she is, in fact, if this is what Bryan discovered from this person he interviewed, that she looked at those kids as cockroaches and they need to be something exterminated and that kind of a thing. I think there's at some point where she's either trying to convince Chad or they're in mutual agreement that these kids are somehow zombies, I think is the word I've heard used.
Zombies. It was more Chad apparently influencing Lori, but that
About the zombie thing. But
correct.
You know what? So I wonder about some of this stuff. And when I watch her, even now in the court settings, and then you go back to the interviews that they conducted when her fourth husband was murdered by her brother. And it's very interesting to me to watch her because the expressions and her demeanor remain unchanged. So you've kind of got this this Stepford wife effect on her. It's just like, if she said, I took the kids out for ice cream yesterday, it would be the same inflection if she said, I took the kids out and murdered them yesterday. It just seems to be consistent with the demeanor that she seems to portray. And watching her in the courtroom when she hears something, I just watch the expression on her face, and it's kind of like, I just can't believe they said that. I mean, it's interesting just to watch her without her saying a word.
And
So
there's been a lot of discussion because she's giggling a lot, and people are wondering where is her defense team, during jury selection, telling her not to giggle. You're on trial for the murder of your two children.
well, I'm going to tell you something. That is a that's a body language function that we call that in the room. We call that inappropriate laughter, and it is another feature. And again, it's not just one particular part of body language that shows deception. It's a combination of those things. So when you watch her when she does the inappropriate laughter, and then she'll do some other things. She may lick her lips. She may look over and look around, or she may feign surprise, that kind of thing. She is trying to, some of that, most of that is something she cannot control. I mean, those defense attorneys can tell her all day long, please, you've got to quit the giggling. You've got to quit doing some of this stuff you do, because she sits there with a smile on her face the whole time. I mean, good grief. I mean, it's almost like she doesn't comprehend, although she does, what she's in there, why she's sitting in that room. So she's an interesting character just to observe in terms of the way she presents herself in the courtroom, the same way she presented herself in the interview with the dead husband. I mean, and she's very matter of fact about this stuff. I mean, she's like, hey, yeah, you know what? It was just, I think in part of the interview when her husband was murdered. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on, I mean, it's a very interesting study. And to interview someone like her, you've got to understand that is her mindset, and let her explain things. And but don't let her take control of the interview. So yeah, she's a very interesting character to analyze in terms of just her demeanor, her body language, and so forth and so on through this process.
And a very sweet character is Marina in the south of Spain. She often will write or tell me certain things like, my posture is horrible, I need a better desk. And she is saying here, Joel, squeeze lemon juice in a bottle of water and take very small sips very often. It is a miracle. I'm going to do that. I have not been able to get rid of this dry cough. Followed by Baby Doll. What's up, Baby Doll? STS Nation. Scott, have you were working narcotics a lot, but did you ever come into contact with anything remotely related to cults? And how would you approach this sort of level of wackiness inside that interview room? And then we'll wrap up real quickly with this one other case that I find interesting, and we will call it a Good Friday, pun intended. Scott.
Yeah, I did not. I've come across people of all different, I would say a multitude of some diagnoses out there, these mental disabilities or people on the spectrum, et cetera. And so like anything else, it's an interview. It's allowing somebody to talk. Are they rational, or is what they're saying, if they're not deceiving me, like intentionally deceiving to lie, if somebody really is having a mental break or something of that nature. Like I've been around plenty of people who have had mental breaks, not during an interview process, but in some other fashion. So you see what is on the face, you see what the words that are coming out. It is irrational, et cetera. So in an interview room, if somebody were to speak, and I'm speaking purely hypothetical, not from experience, it would be okay. So what is being said here, and allow the conversation to continue. Like I have said, I have recorded pretty much every interview that I have done, and so thereby you're allowing the words to be spoken, and anybody can make a judgment of, hey, why is that being said, and then they can see for themselves the facial expressions and whatnot, right? And so, talking earlier about profiling and whatnot, no, so like Phil, you're just using your experiences. You're watching a lot of other people doing interviews, etc., and you're looking at the facial expressions, the bodily cues, combined with all the education that you've received in the classroom, putting them together and then making an assessment and saying, yeah, that you're on point, you're not on point. And so someone who was expressing very delusional explanations to something, for example, the giggling, during talking about or referring to the homicide of your own children, I know as a rational father, human being, that that was not something that I would do, and anybody else who is in love or has love for their children or loved one, and then all of a sudden to see something so out of the ordinary that is just phenomenally different, and so giggles or just total expressions outside of that is rational, yeah, would make me wonder what is being said, how and why. So ultimately, the interview room is just in a conversation, and you can tell just by normal bodily clues. Somebody's holding back, somebody's not holding back, somebody's going to tell you the information and and the reasons behind it. They either click or they don't to a rational person who's observing.
YouTube user. I love the name because it is right to the point. Love and respect to you all. SGS, big fan from the UK. So much love and many cuddles to Carm. I will tell her you and yours. Baby Doll writes, I would date Phil. Calm down, everybody. I know he's married. I hope his wife is not watching because she won't let him on the show anymore. Baby Doll, you're
That's not true. My wife and I are going on 40 years plus, so I don't think she's going to be bothered by that.
Canada, Wheezy's in Canada, Norla's in Australia. Look at this. We've not seen this before, guys. We've got Jackie from the UK.
This is cool.
It is cool. We've got East Tennessee here to round us out. We'll finish up on this story because I'm intrigued by this, and this could become a bigger story over the days. His name is Bob Lee, and he just moved to Miami, where I am, but he's became very successful at a very young age in Silicon Valley. He was instrumental in creating the mobile payment service Cash App, as it is known. On Tuesday, around 2:35 a.m. in the morning, in a well-to-do neighborhood of San Francisco by the Embarcadero, he was stabbed, and people do not know who killed this guy. His name is Bob Lee. By all accounts, a wonderful man. They released some of the 911 call. You can hear him screaming, help. Someone stabbed me. And then there's another person who gets on 911 and says that there's a male screaming help, saying someone stabbed him. And then you can hear the 911 operator and someone saying, advise, he is bleeding out. He is outside on the street. Phil, this is I'm looking Rincon Hill, again, a pretty well-to-do area of a city that, by all accounts, seems to be crumbling before our eyes. San Francisco, super successful. Just sold his home in Silicon Valley. I think he sold it for $4.4 million. He's got 2 children. He actually had his dad move in with him to a place here in Miami. He's working on a few other tech companies. Stabbed in the early morning hours. How do you begin here, Phil, to investigate this? And he's obviously someone of a higher profile nature. Do you look at surveillance cameras? Are you speaking to? There are not a lot of people out at 2:35 in the morning. Where do you start?
And what's the location? Is it
It was outside a apartment building on the sidewalk, outside the apartment building in this well-to-do neighborhood in a very tech area.
Does he reside in that apartment?
No, he was just in town visiting. He lived there for many years, moved to Miami. He was there on business. allegedly there on business.
Yeah, right. My first question would be is what is he doing out at 2:30 in the morning at that location?
And I
That would be
didn't think of that. So there's a difference between a guy with 40 years law enforcement experience and a guy with none. I didn't think about that. But 2:30 in the morning, you're probably not coming from a business meeting. So that's your first question.
well, that would be my first question as to why is he there and what gets him there? Is there a vehicle nearby that he's rented? Did he get there with an Uber or a Lyft or a taxi? How does he get to that location and why is he at that location? And then if he's got a cell phone on him, then you're going to look and scroll through that phone. Let's see who he spoke with last. Is there any text messaging and that was calling him to that location for whatever reason? So
Let me stop you real quick because I know nothing about nothing about nothing. You get that? Are you allowed to just freely go into a victim's cell phone? Do you have to get some sort of court order to be able to do that, or you just pick up a cell phone and you're right away allowed to go through it?
well, the victim's cell phone, yes, because it no longer has
Okay.
there's no longer a subscriber, and in a sense, it's now abandoned. I mean, there's no now you can get a search warrant if you want to, but we've had we're going to have to expedite that. And now later on, of course, we're going to dump the phone and so forth and so on. But that initial blush is if that phone is there, the first thing I want to know is what's the last number that contacted him, or where was the last text message coming from? Who was it coming from? What was the nature of those text messages? And that's contingent. Remember that you can get into the phone. If the phone has got a passcode, which most of them do, or it's got face recognition, that kind of thing. Presumably, if he had that type of a feature on it, you could put it up to his face and boom, the phone would open. But and the laws may be different in well, everything's different in California, so I won't even speak to that. So yeah, there's some things that you can do right there initially at the scene that are going to give you hopefully that will give you some direction to go, and that would be transportation. Why is he there? How did he get there? Who is he meeting? Can we identify that person and for what purpose?
And Scott, the San Francisco DA, a person named Brooke Jenkins, said on Twitter, no arrests have been made in the case. We do not tolerate these horrific acts of violence in San Francisco, she went on to say, even though there's horrific acts of violence every day in San Francisco right now. And then his father was quoted as saying, Bob would give you the shirt off his back. He would never look down on anyone and adhere to a strict no judgment philosophy. His brother, Tim Oliver Lee, on Facebook posted about his brother's death, saying, I was so fortunate to grow up with him, and I feel like I've lost part of myself. By the way, Marina writes, yes, please, the art of the interview. So we're going to work on something about that. And then Andy, a friend of the show, hello from Detroit to the best crime channel with the best guests. Hi, Fil and Scott. I don't know. This case caught my attention. I mean, just because it seems to be such a random act of violence, but then it's attached to a very high profile tech executive, Scott. Does the fact that it is so high profile, what kind of pressure does that add to law enforcement that you found in the course of your career when look, if we're being honest, if this was just a random individual on the streets of San Francisco that no one's ever heard of, and it's a stabbing and it goes unsolved, the family is going to care. But here it's got the attention. Elon Musk tweeted about this. Other big tech executives have tweeted about it. So what about the high profile pressure on top of where would you start with this?
Yeah, I mean, there is pressure, right? But as an investigator, the notoriety, or the famousness, whatever, of a victim should never come into play. But yes, you do have, I would say, undue pressure. It is pressure that's coming from all the political parties where they're saying, hey, get me something, get me something, get me something. And if there is not something that's readily there, that has a hot lead, and some time is going to take place where good old-fashioned investigative work is the only way to get something. It's important this is where a good supervisor comes in to keep that distance from the investigation, the investigators, those who are in it, and those of the powers that be that just want information, right? Because everybody wants the information of all the political leaders and all those in places of power. Um, but like Phil said, there are important questions, and hopefully investigators are looking at, hey, the time of night for somebody um, of that stature. Why are you out? Are you walking a dog or pet? Are you just leaving a bar? Are you just doing this? But 2:30 in the morning, and that's just where the victimology is important. Is this somebody who is ultimately, no matter where he's living or traveling to, is always out at 2:30 in the morning, whether it be at a bar, or somebody who's just running, not having enough. That's where it's important to come up with the victimology. So you can say, oh, so being out at 2:30 is a normal pattern for this individual, as opposed to, is this something that's a targeted hit? Is this something that's a total random act of violence? It's but it's important for a supervisor at this point to keep the distance and keep that pressure off the investigation, so the investigation can go about just like any other homicide investigation for these investigators.
Sue Panakis, hi from Perth, Western Australia, where there was just a big UFC event. I'm a big UFC fan. Really enjoy these. I'm not intelligent, but these discussions are intelligent. I'm talking about UFCs as she's discussing intelligent conversations. So, and by the way, the UFC, there's a UFC fight in Miami tomorrow. I'm a big fan of the fight game. It takes a lot of courage in a weird way to get into an octagon and fight another man, something I wouldn't do, but Fil Waters would, and Scott Duffey would too, I'm sure. But speaking of Fil Waters, in case you didn't know, he is America's most respected detective. He has become a world expert at obtaining criminal confessions. You heard him say it himself. He's been all around the world teaching classes on this, more than 23 years in the Houston PD, over 400 homicide cases. He is the owner, if you need help, of Kindred Spirits Investigations. And he's also the star of the new show, The Interrogator, which I switched to The Investigator. It must be a Freudian thing, because Phil always says he didn't like the name The Interrogator. It really should have been called The Interviewer. But Phil, back to this case of Bob Lee, this tech executive, and then whatever you'd like to share to round out the show. Is this the kind of thing that would keep you up at night? It happened on Tuesday in the middle of the night. Apparently an innocent guy stabbed. You don't know if it was a robbery or for what reason, kind of mysterious circumstances. Back in the day when you were in the middle of all your action, is this the kind of thing where your wife would have said, Phil, it's time to go to bed. It's time to catch an hour's worth of sleep. And you would have said, no, I got to figure out what's going on here.
Well, a case like that, which I have had some, is if you get some clues, you run and gun until you can take a break. So I've gone 36, 48 hours straight, tried to catch a little power nap for maybe 15, 20 minutes in my office, sitting in my chair. And then once that dust is settled and at that point, you're going to have supervisors that are going to tell you to go home and get some sleep and then come back and start it all up again. So, those I don't know what leads they have there, where they are in the course of the investigation, but there were I had a pretty good philosophy about not taking stuff home with me. So I never brought case files home. I didn't do reports at home because that stuff's always going to be there the next day. When I was able to go home and go to sleep, then I would take the advantage of that, and then get up and hit it hard the next day and get back down there and into it. And there were many times where I would discuss where we were, because my wife always asked me, well, okay, what's going on? Da, 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 da. And she might make some suggestions that I hadn't thought about. And so, yeah, but in most cases, I don't recall ever losing sleep over a case. It was getting the sleep when I could.
And Phil, let me put you on the spot, since you probably know very little about this case and you're going to tell me to buzz right off. But what's your gut tell you after all these years? Is this a random robbery gone bad or something more sinister?
Oh, you can buzz right off.
I knew he'd say that. Sensory Combustion, meanwhile, says, thank you, Fil and Scott. Great show. Scott, if you didn't know, is the director of Wilmington University's Criminal Justice Institute, an FBI agent in Delaware for 20 years, a Pennsylvania police officer for 5.5 years. He keeps Phil and myself straight. He is the voice of reason. By the way, Marina says we need to meet Mrs. Fil. She must be something. She must be a patient woman.
Okay, well, here's my response when anybody says that. They don't call her Saint Sandra for nothing.
Saint Sandra. Look at that. Do you call her Sandy or is it Sandra?
Sandra.
My mother-in-law is Sandy, but her real name is Sandra. But if you call her Sandra, she gets mad. So it's Sandy. Shout out to Sandy. Both Sandra and Sandy. Nancy Dennis writes, learn so much every time. Scott, what tidbit of knowledge can you leave STS Nation with before we sign off? No pressure. It could be about anything.
It's Good Friday. So
everyone be good.
The sun will be rising in 3 days.
Amen.
All will be good again.
Amen. And he's talking about the SON. Well, I would remind everybody, my final comment was, that was great, Scott. And we didn't plan that, by the way. Everyone have a good Easter, and keep in mind exactly what Scott just talked about, what it's all about.
Took the Jewish guy one iota of a second, but I got it, and I'm on board, and I get what everyone is saying. And
we're all Jews.
We are. We're all one family. So happy Easter, happy Good Friday, happy Passover, and it's Ramadan too. I don't know if you say happy Ramadan, but happy Ramadan. And a final comment here, which I just got. Great show and great panel. And a final comment, Phil has a cool haircut. And a final comment, thank you, Joel, Phil, and Scott. Love you guys. Love you, STS Nation. Love you, America. Love you, Delaware. And love you, Houston, and everywhere in between.